Trade restrictive measures are many. There are tariff barriers and non-tariff barriers of international trade. Export subsidy is an important non-tariff barrier of international trade. Export subsidy is the government support to the domestic firm or domestic producers to boost export. This is to encourage export of the nation. This is the deliberate attempt of the government to boost the export. It helps the domestic producers to produce more than the domestic demand. So the excess demand will be normally exported. So this is the this may be the financial support or non-financial support of the government to the domestic producers to boost the export. This is also to reduce the dependence on import as well. So how does the export subsidy is possible? Export subsidy will be done by the government. It will be normally done by the national government, central government, through direct payment to the domestic producers by transferring cash to the domestic producers. This is the one of the ways of doing export subsidy. Second one is tax relief or tax concession. Tax concession may be the tax exemption or tax reduction of the for the domestic producers. Similarly, third one is loans at low cost or at subsidy rate loan to the domestic producers. This is another export subsidy measure. The fourth one is government financed advertisements. The advertisements for the that could be helpful for boosting the demand of the domestic producers. The government may fund certain advertisement for boosting the demand of the domestic producers. That is to boost the export of the commodities as well. So export subsidy is possible through four ways: direct payments, tax relief or tax concession, loan at low cost, then government financed advertisements. Why do nations follow export subsidy? Export subsidy is being followed by the governments, by the national governments, to increase the exports primarily. This is basically to increase export. This is to flourish the export industries, export sector of the economy. When the export sector of the economy is flourished, the more employment opportunities will be generated in the export industries or export sectors. So the export subsidy could be helpful to reduce the trade deficit, if any, or if there is no trade deficit, export subsidy will help the nation boost the export and increase the trade surplus. It is to maximize the domestic production and increase the gross domestic product or national income of the nation. Export subsidy is to capture the market share, foreign market share for the domestic producers. Domestic producers may be deliberately able to capture the market share in the foreign country with the help of the subsidy, export subsidy. So this is the deliberate way of making the domestic firms of the nation competitive internationally. Then we have a question to answer: is export subsidy fair? Export subsidy is in fact part of protectionist policy. This is not part of the free trade policy. This is part of the protectionism or protectionist policy. Through export subsidy, government has been deliberately trying to boost the export of goods and services. So this is the deliberate attempt by the government. This is not by the invisible hand of the market. Market has nothing to do in export subsidy. The major player in export subsidy is the government, and this is in fact not suitable and not fair for a globalized world. This is as I said, is part of protectionist policy. By encouraging the domestic export industries, the domestic firms are gaining the competence, gaining the competitiveness internationally, but it is deliberately. So through export subsidy, domestic firms will gain the competence deliberately. So this is not fair. I am repeating again. This is not fair for a globalized world. This will shut the door before the foreign players in the domestic market. But we cannot say this is not fair overall, because certain industries need to get support of the government. Certain industries may be at infant stage. Certain nations may be at maybe the lower income nation. So the domestic export industries of the domestic nation must be encouraged, must get the support of the government. So export subsidy may not be fair in certain circumstances, but for the liberalized, globalized world, for this is not fair. But for certain circumstances, export subsidy may be necessary to increase the to flourish the domestic sectors, domestic industries, increase the employment opportunities, to increase the national income of the nation. This may be necessary in certain circumstances, but anyhow, this trade restrictive measure is being utilized by the nations